Let's talk more for the next few minutes about this threat from Donald Trump to place a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. We're going to focus specifically on one key Canadian industry that could be seriously harmed if Donald Trump follows through, and that is aluminum. Canada is the fourth largest producer of aluminum in the world. It makes 80% of the new or primary aluminum in North America, and of the Canadian industry, Quebec makes up about 90% of that. Overall, from Canada, 93% of primary aluminum exports go to the United States. But as much as Canada's aluminum industry depends on exports to the U.S. also depends heavily on Canadian product. The U.S. consumes about 6 million tons of aluminum a year, and it only produces itself about 800,000. This is for things like cars, construction projects, planes. The rest it has to import, and mainly it imports from Canada. So there is two-way impact here, and we want to talk about all of this with Jean Simard, who is the president of the Aluminum Association of Canada. He is in Montreal this morning. Monsieur Simard, thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you for inviting me.
When you heard, we talked about, the threat of a tariff during the campaign, we knew that threat was out there, but when you heard it wasn't the 10% that had been discussed, that it was indeed 25%, what was your reaction?
Surprised by the quantum, but we were expecting some kind of an announcement early on between now and the inauguration. So it's more of a tone-setting salvo from the president-to-be than a definitive final announcement. And we think that the significance of the amounts is certainly more of a signal to start negotiation very early on in his mandate than a definitive attack on Canada.
Okay, so an opening gambit. You see that, and many people have said that, a negotiation tactic. Because if it were to go through as pledged, this 25%, what impact would that have on the aluminum industry in Canada?
Well, to start with, let's look at the numbers. If we were in 2022, using the numbers of 2022, this would mean a surtax of $3.25 billion on aluminium, Canadian aluminium going into the US, to be paid by US consumers out of an overall $110 billion of surtax on all goods in Canada. So it's a huge amount, highly inflationary. And when you trickle down the industrial value chain on both sides of the border, what it means is that the US mom and pop shop that processes aluminium to make components would probably be priced out of the market to the benefit of a competitor from outside of the country.
Okay. Can you just pause on that? Because you did something very special for us. Obviously, it would have a huge impact here in terms of economic impact and job loss, potentially. But the huge impact that this would have in terms of pricing in the U.S., and we've done up a graphic, Monsieur Simard. We asked you to sort of, in a really simple way, explain how this would work. If you can walk us through the process from the time that Canadian prime aluminum first crosses the border until it's used in something like cars and trucks. We can see from these arrows in the graph. Just explain that and how they'd be adding in tariffs along the way.
So Canada produces primary metal, as you mentioned early on, and this metal is shipped to the U.S. Across the border to rolling mills, mostly in New York, Kentucky, or let's say Ohio. And then it's processed, it's hot rolled inside this industrial value chain and, would cross the border back into Canada to be processed at the Novelis Kingston plant, as an example, in Ontario. And there it's cold roll and undergoes the finishing process. Thereafter, it moves back across the border into the US. So every time it crosses the border, it would be taxed. So at the end, this product would be delivered in the the end of the industrial value chain at an automotive manufacturer for cars or trucks.
Right.
So the final product would be impacted by a series of taxes of the aluminum going back and forth through the processing phases across the border.
And then you mentioned that overall figure.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, you just mentioned that overall figure of that $3.25 billion surtax as a result of assuming all of those additional costs. Do you think that Donald Trump realizes that that's how it would work, and then how much more the American consumer would end up paying?
I'm not sure that at this point in time, what I refer to more as a signal, giving a tone to upcoming negotiation, entails such an in-depth analysis of the potential or the real impacts that would have this surtax. I think it's just it's more of an announcement that is so significant that it's a signal about negotiations, not a signal about something that will be implemented.
So interesting, and I'd love to have another conversation with you in even more detail as we watch this, but can I ask you just two quick questions finally to conclude? Number one is, are you positioning, if the U.S. is unwilling to pay that extra money, let's say hypothetically down the line, how would the Canadian industry respond? Do you have other markets to which you could turn?
Interesting question. In the aluminium sector, Canada is very well positioned to ship either to the US or to Europe. The reason we're shipping to the US is because it's the best priced market in the world. That's why everybody is trying to push its metal towards that North American market. But if we have to do a price arbitrage between a non-tariff market in Europe and a highly tariff market in the US, you can expect to see a shift in trade volumes of aluminum in favor of Europe, which is also a highly deficit market. They need a lot of metal. Because of, you were mentioning to us in a pre-conversation earlier, Russian sanctions having a big impact there in terms of their need. So that's something to follow. And I also want to ask you just a quick characterization, if you could, at the end. You've been president of the Aluminum Association since 2009. You went through the Trump administration and have been through the tariff issue prior. What did you learn in that time in terms of better shaping the response this time, how you're going to answer this threat, and do you expect to be part of Team Canada and part of the negotiating table looking at how to deal with this? I think we need a Team Canada 25 very, very, very soon. We need to unite unions, businesses, industry associations alongside government. We have to manage the politics out of this. It's a united front for a national issue. We have to do our homeworks. We have to work with data. Canada was very well documented going in, and it also had done its homeworks in terms of potential retaliation measures, such as tariffs on very specific products coming out of the United States, which are not necessarily aluminum related, but are very emblematic of U.S. brands such as Kentucky Bourbon, Harley-Davidson, and stuff like that. So we've been there, we've done that, we know how to go about it, and the people behind the numbers are already active. So we have to be, I think the best quote is from President Zelensky, who was asked very early on in the conflict if he was afraid of President Putin using the nuclear weapon. And he said, "Never be afraid, just be ready. We're ready." We'll end on that. And as I say, I hope we can have a further conversation. But thank you so much, Mr. Simard, for how this will affect your industry, aluminum in Canada. He's in Montreal. Thanks.